A relationship is like a dance. It takes two to tango. Want to have healthy and successful relationships filled with passion, fun, and harmony? Hi, and welcome to the Two to Tango Show with Linda Sutton, a podcast that explores how we can improve your relationships with God, yourself, your intimate partners, and the community. Tune in and learn actionable insights and tips you can use to improve your relationships. The battle of the sexes ends here. Join Linda Sutton today and take your relationships to a whole new level while having fun every step of the way.
Welcome to the Two to Tango Show, where our role and our goal is to help you with all of your relationships. From your relationship with God and self, intimate partner and family, community, nature, and nations. Hi, I am your host and usually doing the most, Linda Sutton, and today we are going to be talking about rites of passage and its impact on relationships. Now, some of you may or may not know that prior to being involved with tango, I was actually an instructor and professor of African dance forms throughout the diaspora, meaning African culture and dance forms and how they not only were dispersed and distributed throughout the world, but also the corresponding that African dance, music, and cultural elements have had an impact on cultures all around the world. And so that was my area of expertise. Is actually how I got involved in Argentine tango, as I was exploring the African roots of tango. And tango just kind of took over my life for a very different reason in terms of kind of what I was learning from it spiritually. But today we're going to go into, if you will, tango's African roots and talk about some cultural elements that come into play when it comes to relationships, and a cultural element that comes into play that can greatly impact relationships. So I know that might have seemed like a little bit of a riddle, but by the end of this episode, all of that will make sense. Some people may not even be aware of what rites of passage is. So I'm going to start there and just kind of make sure we're all on the same page. Now, I do want to kind of have a caveat. I will talk about African culture, music, and dance. I want to acknowledge that Africa is a continent that has many countries, and those countries have many ethnic groups. So Africa is not a country. Africa is a continent that is comprised of many countries, many different ethnic groups, and therefore different cultures that are attributed to those different ethnic groups in those countries. And so it's not kind of an overarching thing. However, there are some fundamental concepts and elements that you will see across all of the ethnic groups and all of the cultural groups on that continent, as well as throughout the world. For example, dance. Dance is a cultural element that you will see across many ethnic groups in Africa, as well as in Europe, as well as in Asia, as well as in the Americas. And so when we start talking about African dance or music or those kind of cultural elements, I'll kind of talk about them in an overarching way. Now, in kind of an African cultural paradigm, and you also see this throughout the world, rites of passage is a cultural element that is embedded in the life of the people. And rites of passage is an acknowledgement and an understanding that as you mature in life, you will come and approach and go through several, and I'll use quotation air marks, anticipated and known life phases. So you, throughout your life, there are several kind of life phases that you will approach that we can anticipate. For example, from childhood to adolescence to adulthood. Those are life phases that we can anticipate that pretty much everyone will go through at some point as they mature and as they grow in adulthood. And so rites of passage understands that those life phases and those life stages are coming. They're expected. We can anticipate them coming. And so therefore, as you move from one life phase or one life stage to another, there is a preparation that is needed and required and desired as you prepare to enter into that next phase or stage. Okay, so there's an understanding that as you move from one life phase or stage to the next, that there's kind of some preparation that needs to occur to prepare you to be ready for what is involved in that next stage. And those who have gone before you know kind of what some of those are. And so what they do is they take you through this process, which is called a rites of passage, kind of loosely, or it's referred to in some way as a rites of passage, in order to prepare you and get you ready for that next phase or stages. They understand that you may not understand what is necessary, but their role and their goal is to equip you, to train you, to ready you for that next stage and phase. That is usually, like I said, embedded in cultures all around the world. It's actually very, very common in cultures around the world, from bar mitzvahs to quinceañeras. Those represent, for example, rites of passage that exist in a natural part of different cultures. So those kinds of things, even circumcision sometimes is considered, it could be acknowledged as an early phase rites of passage. Now, this is important to understand because in the Americas, or especially in more US culture, though that is not necessarily as common or as formal. Now, we may talk about the Sweet 16, we may talk about, kind of the coming of age at the age of 18, and then again, the coming of age, next level of age at the age of 21. But kind of those very, very formal preparation stages, at least in current culture and society, may not be as common as we would expect in other countries and other cultures. So from kind of an African cultural worldview, those rites of passage, ceremonies, preparations are usually very, very formal and very, very comprehensive, as I say, from cradle to grave, from the beginning of life to one's sunset years, from one sunrise to one sunset. And what I have observed is that because in the United States, and I'm going to focus on the United States, these rites of passage ceremonies, these rituals, these preparations are not as common and as formal. A lot of the relationship breakdowns that we see are because people have not successfully either gone through a rites of passage to prepare for that next phase of life, or they don't understand what that next phase of life involves, or they are in denial of that next life phase. So from childhood to adolescent to adulthood to becoming a husband or wife to becoming a father or mother to eldership, each of these life phases requires an understanding of that upcoming phase and a preparation for the apparent shifts that will happen. And so when you don't understand them, those new life phases and those shifts, are not prepared for them, or you deny them, then not only does it disrupt your own personal development, but because those around you, those in front of you and behind you in terms of chronology are going through those phases anyway, you can actually impact the development of those around you. So if you are not prepared to move into your next phase, you can not only disrupt your own personal development, but you can actually disrupt the development of your children, say perhaps, or your grandchildren, because they are going to be going progressively through their phases as well. So you might see a clash there. One of the areas that I'm actually seeing the most prominent right now in terms of lack of understanding, lack of preparation, and a denial of this life phase is the rites of passage into eldership, actually. I'm seeing a real lack of preparation and understanding for our men and women that are moving into the phase of eldership and moving into their sunset years. And I don't want to confuse retirement with eldership. Eldership is a standing in the community. Retirement is a standing in the workforce. So those are different, and you can arrive at a state of eldership sooner than, say, retirement, because your retirement may be set by law in terms of age. However, your status as an elder may come at a different phase as your children move into the creation of their own families, for example. That might put you into eldership at a different time frame or age than, say, that which is set by retirement. So I want to acknowledge that. I want to actually do a whole episode on the breakdown of family relationships when that rites of passage and eldership does not move forward successfully. And I'm going to do it as it relates to the father and the mother, or the man of the house and the woman of the household. When they do not successfully move into eldership, they create these two different phenomena that we joke about in culture, and that is about becoming the monster-in-law or the mother-in-law, and this idea of the crazy uncle or the Romeo, the perpetual man who is attempting to reclaim his youth by becoming a bachelor retroactively, if you will. So I want to do an episode completely on those two things, because I see it's actually becoming more and more common in culture, and it's actually creating a ripple effect in the development of the generations coming behind them. And I think it needs to be addressed up front. But just kind of in a summary fashion, I want to acknowledge that as far as eldership is concerned, when there is a lack of preparation for eldership, when there is a lack of preparing and facing one's mortality, one's potential frailty, if you subscribe to those things, that's a whole other conversation. But just most people, as they move into eldership, are facing their own mortality, their own frailty. When they don't face those or prepare for them, it actually creates a ripple effect for the generations coming behind them, because it often puts the onus for that preparation on the generation of their children that they should have taken on themselves, at least in terms of thinking it through. So like I said, I want to do a whole episode on those, because it's really, really intricate in terms of the ripple effect it has on the generations when a parent, a mother or father, does not prepare for or face the coming of their own frailty or mortality, or the shift of their role as it relates to their family as their family matures. When they do that, number one, they usually don't shift the roles successfully and create a problem in family dynamics in that way. But also, many times they will attempt to recover their youth. And then because they're attempting to recover their youth, they wind up competing with the youth of the coming generation rather than preparing the youth of the upcoming generation. And so you may even see elder men competing with their sons and grandsons for female mates, rather than preparing their sons and grandsons to be successful fathers and husbands. So, I mean, those are the kinds of dynamics that you may see a mother fighting for her son's attention rather than supporting the new matriarch of the family, the new rising matriarch of the family, as their son moves from being a son to a husband and a father. And so the mother may become at odds with the new wife and mother that is coming up through her son. And so you see all kinds of tensions there. Like those are the things that happen when you do not successfully go from the rites of passage into eldership. Other areas of rites of passage where that can cause a breakdown in relationships is parenthood. So when children that are adults are not prepared for the rites of passage of parenthood, then they have not usually been groomed to understand the impact and implications and consequences of their sexual engagement. So they may not be prepared for the fact that this is a potential consequence. They also may not be prepared for the outcome of their consequence. So they may be sexually engaged, but you have families that haven't been planned and prepared for, and the father or mother may not be mentally, physically, emotionally, or financially prepared for that. However, when they receive their training up front, then they can start the process of preparing for that in their early adulthood before they become spouses and become parents. I know I'm going to go in reverse, but when they get this preparation, then they start to understand that the choices that they make could impact their lives for the rest of their lives. So continuing and kind of, like I said, I'm going in reverse. The rites of passage in terms of becoming a spouse. And usually you see that come in the form at least in the United States, in the form of a bridal shower and a bachelorette party, maybe some premarital counseling, but really the kind of preparing a young man and a young woman to become a spouse and to become a parent is something that needs to be coming up through their early adulthood phase. Not only the training, but the preparatory steps that are needed. So young men being prepared to understand that they will need to be able to provide financially and emotionally, and in terms of commitment to the woman that they mate with and create children with. Those kinds of things are trainings and rites of passage that need to occur prior to it occurring. And when it does not occur, then you have broken homes, you have families that are not completed, you have children that are not being provided for by both parents in a healthy, holistic environment. So, just because we're functioning and surviving outside of that construct, if you will, that was not a part of the design. Just like it requires both a man and a woman to create the child, because a child requires more time to mature, then the contribution of the mother and father to be present in that child through all of its stages of development, early development, are needed, and needed in proximity, because that's how they learn. Children learn by watching. Children learn by observing all the life skills that they need by watching their parents. And if you don't have parents in the home engaging with each other in a healthy way, not only do they not go through the early stages of childhood development successfully, but they also don't learn the skills that are necessary in order to have successful relationships in the future. So that's reality. It has a ripple effect. Continuing to go backwards, the rites of passage into adulthood is very, very essential, because now children are learning to become fully responsible for their actions, legally, morally, and societally. So as a young person, until they come of age, the parents absorb some of the responsibility for the actions of the young person, because they are not legally responsible for some of those actions in most cases. And so, but as they come into adulthood, not only are they socially, morally, and societally responsible for their actions, but now there's a legal component. And so when a young person is prepared for rites of passage, they understand the responsibilities, the implications, and the consequences that come with that new legal responsibility for their actions. Continuing to go backwards, adolescence is a rites of passage. And like I said, in some cult, so you may see a little bit of it in terms of the Sweet 16, the quinceañera, which is the 15th birthday, the bar mitzvah, which is where we acknowledge that the young person has started to shift into adulthood. And that is in part because of the physical changes that they're going through, the hormonal changes. And so they're beginning to seek independence, along with those accompanying hormonal and physical developmental changes and maturations. However, During this phase, they are not yet legally responsible for their actions in most cases. The parents are still legally responsible, so they're learning how to manage in that kind of new space of wanting independence and wanting to be treated as being responsible, but not really being legally, morally, societally responsible. And also learning that they don't yet have the experience to make certain decisions and are to be trained and prepared for that. In some ways you might see cotillion and things like that, which are, charm schools and things that you may have saw in the past where young ladies and young men were being prepared for in the early stages of preparation of what it means to be an adult, and also the early stages of what it means to be a spouse and a potential parent. And so it's usually start that grooming, the early stages of the grooming and the rites of passage starts in adolescence, acknowledging that hormonal and physical developmental change that is occurring. And then moving from infanthood into childhood, there are some rites of passages that you see that. So the child is moving from a complete dependence on the mother in terms of literally their physical needs in terms of nourishment, to starting to go through the phases of development and varying levels of independence throughout their childhood phases. For example, one area where you may see a rites of passage is when the child goes from being an infant at home or in daycare to actually going to school. So that's a big shift in terms of our rites of passage and preparing the child to no longer be 100%, if you will, under the care of the parents, but now being expected to be away from their parents for longer periods of time, interacting with other adults, interacting with other children successfully. And so that can be a rites of passage. So I know I went in reverse, but just kind of to kind of do a quick review of the varying rites of passage is that, you go from infanthood to childhood, childhood to adolescence, adolescence to adulthood, adulthood to becoming a spouse to becoming a parent, and a parent to becoming an elder are the most commonly known, if you will, life phases. And I know culturally and societally things may change, but those are phases that should come up. And many of them are preparation for the next phase and next stage, and for a reason, and rightly so. And so, just as I said before, if you do not know the purpose of a thing, you will abuse it. And then, as I like to say, just because you do not know the purpose of a thing does not mean it does not have one. And so the rites of passage process has a purpose, whether or not we know what it is or understand it or think it's outdated or no longer needed or useful. When we do not go through them, it has an impact on our development and our relationships, our family units, and therefore community, and therefore society. So this is really, really important and critical that we understand that when we are not successfully going through our rites of passage and we're not prepared, not only are we not prepared, but we could be very much wreaking havoc on all of the other members of our families because they are progressing through their phases. Like I said, if a gentleman is not prepared to go into eldership and he goes through what we call the midlife crisis, and now he's competing with his son for a mate, that creates a whole different dynamic. So if a young man is coming of age where he is looking for mates that are his contemporaries, meaning his same age, but his father or his grandfather or his uncle is competing for the same young ladies, like that creates a real power struggle and clash, and it creates a disruption in the flow because normally that young man might be seeking advice and wisdom and guidance from the gentleman on what to do. However, he can't seek that if he is competing for the same young ladies as his uncle or his father or his grandfather. I mean, so this is real. So, we don't like to talk about it. We like to, just kind of, we're in a different cultural paradigm. And so, we have different dynamics, but just because we have different dynamics does not mean that there is not a natural disruption. I mean, a sapling is not a redwood. And so just because we want to just say that they're all trees, it's true, but the trees are at different stages of development, different stages of maturation, different stages of life, and so therefore have different requirements and things that they are bringing to bear. And so we really, want to acknowledge that, because those things are important and can create, once again, mental, emotional, spiritual, and financial challenges that get shifted. So I really wanted to acknowledge that, in terms of from a kind of an African and world cultural paradigm, that if, that we might want to start looking at those for ourselves, even if we don't have formal mechanisms in our community for doing that, is to seek to create them, because those things are coming into play. And for those who come from generations and cultures where that is formalized, we can provide guidance to those who are not aware, and perhaps help them to understand that some of the disruption that they may be experiencing in their own personal lives, or in their relationships, or in their families, is in part because they did not go through a rites of passage. They did not make the transition physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, even though they are progressing. And so that is what's creating the schism, if you will, and there's no congruency there, because they're an elder, but they're not acknowledging that they've already moved into that life phase, just from a developmental standpoint. Okay. In tango, you will see that, and I always like to bring it to tango. Is in tango, you see that, and we've talked a little bit about it, but I want to bring it to the forefront again, which is you're going from being in a single state to a state of partnership. And so there are things that you do to prepare yourself physically, in terms of your own technique and your training, to prepare you to be in partnership. So for example, being able to manage your own balance is something that you might work on without a partner, to prepare you to be with a partner more successfully. And I love this, because there is kind of your own independent technique and your own independent training, your own independent study as a single person, as a single dancer, that prepare you to be in partnership with a partner, and to be in a dance with your partner successfully. Similarly, you see that in kind of the rites of passage, which is, as single people, they are learning to prepare, hopefully, in terms of what it means to go from being single to being in a spousal committed relationship. And so, to transition, to prepare, and in your, as we say spiritually, in your season of singleness, for your season of partnership. And so you see that even in your tango training. And with us, we have 2 different training programs that I created, 2 systems. And one is the U2 Tango system, which is how you prepare yourself in your training as a single person and preparing for partnership in the dance. And then, of course, Tutu Tango, which is the dance of relationships and the dance of partnerships. So there is a period of preparation for partnership, and if you can understand the new role that you're about to enter into, then you can also understand the responsibilities that come with that, and the consequences of moving from a state of singleness to a state of partnership. Usually there's some sort of testing, even in tango, that occurs with either your peers or your elders or other members of the dance, or even your partner, in terms of testing your readiness to move into the next stage. It could come even in the form of your instructor. So your instructor could say, hey, you're not ready to get out on the floor by yourself in a social environment. You don't know how to navigate yet. So we may keep you in the classroom setting training here before you are ready to go into a social environment, because you don't have the navigation skills, you might not be able to successfully and safely negotiate having your partner on a dance floor. So we might need to keep you in a training environment until it's ready, and then your partner or your instructor or other dancers within the community may let you know that it's time for you to move into that new space and that new place that we know as the dance of tango. So this is Linda. We've been talking about the rites of passage, and we'll circle back around and talk about the master-in-law and Romy Rome, the uncle, here on the Tutu Tango Show, and how going through the rites of passage or not going through rites of passage successfully can have an impact on your relationships, the dance of relationships, and even your tango. And as we say here on the Tutu Tango Show, it not only takes you to tango, but absolutely it takes you to tango. Ciao.
We have just concluded another moving episode of the Two to Tango Show with Linda Sutton. Did you enjoy the show? If so, head over to thetwototangoshow.com and discover a whole array of resources to help you spice up your relationship in every way. That's tangoshow.com. We would also like to hear from you, so don't forget to leave a review or feedback. Join us again next week for another entertaining and fun episode. Until then,